Logan said with a big smile as he walked into the living room, tossed his sunglasses onto the coffee table, and stood there looking far too pleased with himself. He was wearing a smart suit and shiny new shoes. His luggage sat nearby, covered in luxury brand logos. First class, luxury hotels in Hawaii. This is the life I've been missing. I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter. What's so funny? He asked, frowning. Oh, Logan, I said, shaking my head. You have no idea what you've done. My name is Rachel, I'm 35, and I work in cybersecurity. For the last 8 years, I've been married to a man who seemed charming but was nothing more than a walking problem. Logan was always the smooth talker, the dreamer, the one who made everything sound exciting and bright. Meanwhile, I was the one making those plans work, holding down a steady job while he hopped from one idea to the next. I ignored all the red flags, the secret bank accounts, the excuses for not earning money because I wanted to believe we were a team. But last week, at 3 a.m., Logan made a mistake. This time, he couldn't smooth talk his way out of it. I was asleep upstairs when it happened. He must have waited until I was deeply asleep before sneaking downstairs to my laptop. My job had taught me to spot scams, but I never thought I'd need those skills in my own home. That night, Logan used my laptop to access one of my credit cards. He copied the details, took photos with his cell phone, and then slipped back into bed as if nothing had happened. The next morning, as I was drinking my coffee, my phone started buzzing with alerts. I opened my banking app and saw nearly $80,000 in charges, designer clothes, watches, first-class flights to Hawaii. And then it hit me. Of course, it was Logan. But instead of panicking, I smiled. The card he used wasn't a personal account. It was a dummy credit card linked to a training program. I work for a company that specializes in fraud detection, teaching companies how to identify and stop financial crimes before they spiral out of control. Every transaction on certain flagged accounts sends an automatic alert directly to the authorities. It's a system designed to catch even the cleverest criminals. Logan had no idea he'd just walked into the perfect trap. The next morning, my phone vibrated with an alert. A high-risk transaction detected on one of our test accounts. My stomach dropped when I read the details. Logan, my own husband. I immediately called my lawyer, Olivia. You are not going to believe this, I blurted out, telling her everything as fast as I could. She didn't even try to contain her laughter. Wait. Let me get this straight, she said between chuckles. He stole a dummy card? The one that's linked to fraud detection. Exactly, I said, unable to hide the satisfaction in my voice. I don't think he had any idea what he was doing. I continued. He probably thought he was being so clever. Olivia let out another laugh. Every purchase he makes is going to set off alarms. Has the police been contacted yet? Not yet, I replied. But it's only a matter of time. For the next few days, I stayed silent, waiting to see how far Logan would go. Then, 3 days later, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up. I knew exactly what that meant. He was using my stolen money to live it up somewhere extravagant. Every night, I watched the fraud alerts roll in. Dinners at fancy restaurants, 7-star hotels, extravagant shopping sprees. Each notification felt like a small victory. He thought he was getting away with it, having no clue he was only tightening the noose around his own neck. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Miss Timothy, this is Wayne Rooney from Federal Investigations. We've identified significant fraudulent activity linked to your account. Do you know who might be responsible? I didn't hesitate. Yes, I replied. My husband. There was a pause. Your husband? I explained everything. How the card was part of a cybersecurity program, how Logan had unknowingly used a flagged test card and basically handed himself in. Wayne Rooney let out a low whistle. Now that's a new one, he commented. We'll need a formal statement, but with what we already have on record, he's in serious trouble. By the time Logan returned to our house, ego inflated after a week of splurging, I was ready. He strolled into the living room as if nothing had happened, dressed in the spoils of a spree, designer clothes, expensive accessories, even a new watch. Thanks for the update, he said with a cocky grin. You really outdid yourself this time. I returned the smile, crossing my arms. You too. And just then the doorbell rang. Logan's grin vanished when he opened the door and found himself face to face with two federal agents. Mr. Timothy, one of them said, "We need to talk to you." And just like that, his little dream getaway came crashing down. I couldn't contain myself. A bubbly laugh escaped before I could stop it. Logan frowned, clearly expecting me to be upset. "What's so funny?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Oh, Logan," I said, shaking my head. "You're about to find out." He dropped his stylish duffel bag on the floor with a thud, still looking smug. "Seriously, Rachel," he said as he shrugged off his expensive jacket and tossed it on the sofa. "You should have told me about that card sooner. Imagine how much fun we could have had, both of us." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "And how exactly did you think this was going to end?" He grinned, kicking off his shoes with the same carefree attitude he always had. "You're always so uptight about money. It's not like you can't afford it," he said smugly. "I thought you'd get over it once you saw how happy it made me." His confidence would have been annoying if it weren't so ridiculous. I held back another laugh, knowing that every word he said was only digging him deeper. "So, the watches, the flights, the 7-star hotels, you thought all that was just a gift for me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't think about it," he replied, gesturing to himself. "It was about time you loosened up a little." I smiled, but in that way that says nothing. I didn't need to reply. As soon as Logan disappeared into the shower, humming a completely off-key tune, I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Olivia. "He's back. Ready to proceed with the plan." Her reply arrived instantly. "Perfect. I'll call Wayne Rooney." For the past week, Olivia and Wayne Rooney had been building the case against Logan. Every transaction he'd made was tracked and recorded, from designer stores to luxury hotels. Logan thought he was untouchable. He had no idea he'd walked right into a trap. Wayne had told me in our last call, the fraud alerts already triggered a full investigation. "We can pick him up anytime, but I suggest letting him feel secure for now. The more confident he is, the better." And now Logan was more confident than ever. He didn't have the slightest clue his world was about to come crashing down. From the bathroom, I heard him singing at the top of his lungs, utterly tone-deaf. I felt strangely calm. For years, I'd let him take advantage of my trust, my kindness, my stability. But this time, he was finally going to face the consequences of underestimating me. A few minutes later, Logan emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a plush towel, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. He flopped onto the sofa, completely relaxed. "You should have seen LA," he said, rummaging in his duffel bag and pulling out a gleaming gold watch. "The shops, the restaurants, it was like a dream." "Sounds amazing," I replied, leaning against the doorway. "Tell me more." That was all he needed. He launched into a long story about his week of splurging, waving his hands dramatically as he spoke. He went on and on about expensive meals, exclusive shops, and how the champagne at a rooftop bar was simply perfect. Every word was a confession. He had no idea I was recording the entire conversation on my phone, ready to send it to Wayne Rooney. "And the best part," Logan said, holding up his new watch to admire it, "nobody suspected a thing. Not even you." The next morning, I met Olivia for coffee to finalize the last details of the plan. "He has no escape," she said, scrolling through all the evidence we'd gathered. The fraud alerts, the charges, and now his own words from last night. It's an airtight case. Wayne Rooney is ready to bring him in. They're coordinating with local police to make the arrest. I nodded, finally feeling the weight of everything settle. "And what happens after that?"
Olivia sighed.
"He'll face multiple charges: fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of a financial account. With the amount of money involved, he's not getting off with a slap on the wrist. Best case scenario, he takes a plea deal and avoids jail time. Worst case, he could spend years behind bars." For a moment, I wondered if I should feel sorry for him. But then I remembered his smug grin, the way he'd flaunted his stolen goods, how he hadn't once stopped to think about the damage he'd caused. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern I'd ignored for far too long. That night, Logan was on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collapse. I heard a knock at the door. My heart beat faster, but not with fear. With anticipation. I walked over and opened it. Wayne Rooney stood on the porch with two uniformed officers. "Good evening, Miss Timothy," Rooney said, his voice calm and professional. But there was a hint of warmth. "Is Logan home?" "He's inside," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." Logan looked up from his phone, frowning. He straightened up on the sofa. "What's going on?" he asked. Wayne Rooney walked toward him, his mere presence making the room feel smaller. "Logan Timothy," Rooney said, "you're under investigation for multiple counts of credit card fraud and unauthorized use of financial accounts. We'd like you to come with us for questioning." The color drained from Logan's face. His confidence evaporated in an instant. "What? No. This has to be a mistake," he stammered, looking at me desperately. "Rachel, tell them this is crazy." I crossed my arms and tilted my head slightly. "I don't know, Logan. You've been pretty busy lately. Maybe you should explain it yourself." The officers began to read him his rights as they led him toward the door. Logan's panic grew. "You can't do this, Rachel," he shouted. "This is a setup. You're my wife. You're supposed to be on my side." I leaned against the doorframe, my expression calm and amused. "I thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives. I guess we both learned something today." Logan's face contorted with rage and desperation. "You won't get away with this," he hissed. I smiled. "Oh, Logan." I closed the door with a sharp click as the officers escorted him outside. The living room felt strangely silent. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space where he'd been just minutes ago. My heart throbbed, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. He was finally gone. But this wasn't over yet. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Olivia. "He's with Wayne Rooney now," she said, her voice firm. "They've started questioning him. From what Rooney tells me, Logan is already trying to spin the story in his favor." "Of course he is," I snorted, rolling my eyes. "Let me guess. He's playing the victim?" "Exactly," Olivia replied with a dry laugh. "He's claiming you gave him permission to use the card. But don't worry. Between the fraud alerts, the charges, and your recording, he doesn't stand a chance." The next morning, Wayne Rooney called me with an update. "We have everything we need," he said confidently. "My husband," I corrected calmly. "Soon-to-be ex-husband." Rooney chuckled softly. He admitted to using the card, but claims he didn't know it was part of a fraud detection program. "He's trying to blame you for the mix-up." "That sounds about right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "So what happens now?" "We're moving forward with the charges." Rooney explained that Logan was facing multiple counts of fraud and unauthorized use of a financial account. Given the amount of money involved, the consequences were going to be serious. Plus, buyer protection programs flagged all his luxury purchases. So those will be reimbursed. You won't have to pay a single cent. Relief washed over me instantly. For days, I'd been carrying the weight of Logan's actions, afraid that somehow he'd get away with it. But hearing the confidence in Rooney's voice, I knew this was my victory. "Thank you," I said, with all the sincerity I could muster. "For everything." "Don't thank me," he replied. "This case practically solved itself. You handled it brilliantly." The consequences hit Logan harder than he expected. News of his arrest spread quickly among our mutual friends. It wasn't long before his carefully crafted image of the charming, carefree husband began to crumble. Judy, the woman I always suspected he was cheating with, apparently dumped him as soon as she heard about the charges. The designer clothes he'd bragged about were confiscated, the flights he'd booked were canceled. His fantasy world was falling apart. And the best part? I didn't have to do a thing. The banks froze his accounts. One night, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Rachel." Logan's voice was low and weary. "I need to talk to you." I couldn't help but let out a laugh. "Logan, the only talking you need to do is figuring out how to explain yourself to a judge." Please, he said, his tone shifting to desperation. I'm sorry. I didn't want it to go this far. I was just lonely. I cut him off, my voice cold. You were just what? Just trying to steal $80,000 from me? Just hoping I wouldn't notice? Just counting on me being too blind or too forgiving to stop you? Silence. Then finally, in a near whisper, he said, I thought you loved me. I let out a sharp sigh, feeling my anger bubble to the surface. I did, Logan. I loved the person I thought you were. I paused, letting my words sink in. I thought I loved you, I continued. But the person who stole from me, lied to me, and thought he could get away with it? That's not someone I could ever love. Before he could say another word, I hung up. A week later, Olivia called with an update. Logan took a plea deal, she said. He's going to avoid jail time, but he'll have to pay back every penny he tried to steal. Plus, he has to complete community service, and his credit will be a disaster for years. Sounds fair, I said, satisfied. He always wanted to live the high life. Now he can see how it feels to be on the other side. Olivia chuckled. You're handling this better than most people would. I smiled to myself. It was funny. For years, I'd thought Logan was the one holding our marriage together. I thought his charm, his big ideas, his ambition were what kept us moving forward. But now I saw it clearly. I was the one holding everything together. He was just dead weight. The day my divorce papers arrived, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the sofa, looking around my apartment. For the first time in a long time, it felt truly mine. Logan's absence wasn't a loss, it was a gift. A chance to start over, to rebuild my life without his constant selfishness weighing me down. As I sipped my wine, I thought about that moment when he'd walked through the door, so full of himself, showing off his stolen goods as if he'd won some kind of prize. He'd been so confident, so sure that he was the clever one. And now he was the one paying the price. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life that was finally my own. The days following Logan's arrest felt strangely peaceful. His things were gone. What little he hadn't sold or crammed into his designer duffel bag, but the space felt lighter, as if the weight of his betrayal had left with him. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. For the first time in years, I could be in my own home without feeling his shadow looming over me. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by to drop off some final paperwork. She settled onto the sofa with her usual no-nonsense attitude and looked at me sideways. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than I thought I would, I admitted, handing her a mug of coffee. It's weird, but I don't even feel angry anymore. Just relieved. Olivia smiled, as if she knew something I was only just discovering. That's because you already won. You didn't just survive this, Rachel. You came out stronger. I thought about that as I looked over the documents, finalizing the details of Logan's financial restitution. It wasn't just about the money, although knowing he had to pay back every last cent felt pretty satisfying. It was about reclaiming my life. For years, I'd let Logan take control, believing it was easier to keep the peace. But now I understood that a peace built on silence and resignation wasn't peace at all. A week later, the official divorce papers arrived. They came in a plain envelope, too small to contain something so big. I held it for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in before opening it. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until I found the words that mattered most. Finalized. Irrevocable. I sat at the kitchen table, holding the letter in my hands, and allowed myself a moment to take it all in. This wasn't the life I'd imagined when I married Logan. I dreamed of a stable relationship, a future built on trust. But looking around at the home I'd rebuilt for myself, I realized I had something better: freedom, clarity, and the certainty that I was far stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. That night, Megan came over with a bottle of wine and my favorite takeout. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. And to the absolute trash you just got rid of. I chuckled, clinking my glass against hers. To never settling for less than I deserve. In the weeks that followed, I started building my new life. I redecorated the apartment, adding pops of color and personal touches that felt like me. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. I finally took that solo vacation I'd been dreaming about for years. I spent my days exploring the coast, enjoying the solitude, and feeling that peace that comes only when you leave everything behind, even if just for a little while. Logan tried to contact me a few more times. He sent vague apologies through mutual friends, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't there to listen. He sent rambling emails, even a ridiculous letter claiming he'd changed. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He made his choices. I made mine. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of his life. He was still struggling to find work, his reputation in tatters from the fraud charges. He'd moved back in with his parents, still convinced he could talk his way out of anything. I didn't feel sorry for him. If anything, I felt relief. He wasn't my problem anymore. A month after everything was finalized, I stood by the window of my apartment, sipping my morning coffee as I watched the city wake up. Sunlight filled the room, reflecting off the new coat of paint I'd chosen, my favorite shade of blue. The space no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home. It was quiet. It was mine. And it was filled with possibilities. I thought about everything that had brought me here. For years, I'd believed in the marriage, in the idea of building a life with Logan. I'd ignored that small voice in my head warning me that something wasn't right, that his charm was just a facade for his selfishness. But now I understood. Walking away wasn't failure, it was strength. That weekend, Megan and I went to brunch. It was a new tradition since Logan was gone, mimosas and waffles. She looked at me and asked, "So, what's next for you?" I smiled, feeling a quiet excitement I hadn't felt in a long time. Honestly, I'm just focusing on me. Work is going great, and I've been thinking about taking a longer trip. Maybe somewhere quiet, near the mountains. Megan raised her glass. That's what I like to hear. You deserve it. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I was finally making decisions for myself, without compromise, without hesitation. Just the freedom to live life on my own terms. Sometimes I'd still hear updates about Logan through mutual friends. He was still struggling to rebuild his life, bouncing from one dead-end job to another. But I didn't care anymore. That story, that burden, wasn't mine anymore. I had my own life to live. And this time, it was all mine. He was trying to repay the money he owed. The designer suits and luxury vacations were long gone, replaced by a reality he never saw coming. But I didn't waste my time thinking about him. He made his choices, I made mine. The last time I heard from him was through an email. A long, rambling apology that sounded more like self-pity than anything sincere. I read the first few lines, then deleted it without replying. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already found it within myself. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. I thought about everything I'd been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fight to reclaim what was mine. It all led me to this moment. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I didn't feel anger or bitterness anymore. If anything, I felt grateful. Logan's betrayal forced me to see my own strength. It pushed me to stop settling, to put myself first, to take control of my life again. I learned to trust my instincts, to value my independence, and to never let anyone else have control of my happiness. I raised my glass to the night sky. To me, I whispered, to starting over. And with that, I closed the chapter on Logan for good, ready to embrace whatever came next.